Savannah Harbor, 1847. Storm clouds rolled over the docks like a warning sent by the heavens themselves. Ariella Monroe tightened her grip on her son's hand. The little boy's fingers curled around hers with innocent trust. No one here knew her past. No one questioned her American name, her quiet life, or the secret that lived behind her son's dark eyes, eyes that didn't come from any man on this side of the ocean. The ship's whistles wailed through the fog, but Ariella barely heard them. She heard only the echo of a voice she once loved, a voice that had banished her from England with a single devastating sentence: "You must leave Ravencourt. Today." She had left without protest, without goodbye, without telling him she carried more than heartbreak inside her. Now she lived a life built on silence until this morning. A letter arrived, a name she swore never to hear again. Lucien Blackwell, Duke of Ravencourt, searching for an American woman, rumors of a child. Ariella's heart stalled. And at that very moment, miles away, stepping off a ship from England, a tall man in a black coat whispered her name into the coastal wind, like a prayer he didn't deserve. Ariella. The letter arrived with the morning tide, a crisp foreign envelope lying innocently amidst the day's mundane correspondence. Ariella Monroe nearly discarded it with the rest, her mind already on the day's tasks, preserving the new specimens of southern moss, collecting Leo from Mrs. Higgins' cottage school. But then her eyes caught the crest. Not a printed one, but a seal, pressed into dark wax with a signet ring she had once known intimately. A raven in flight, its wings outstretched against a tower. The world tilted, her breath hitched, a sharp, painful sound in the quiet of her small study, the rustle of oak leaves outside the window, the distant hum of Savannah. It all faded into a high-pitched whine. Her fingers, usually so steady they could dissect the most delicate of petals, trembled as she traced the emblem. Asterisk, Ravencourt, asterisk. 4 years. 4 years of building a life from the ashes of heartbreak, of crafting a new identity as a widow, of ensuring no one looked too long at her son's dark, too knowing eyes, eyes that were a perfect, devastating mirror of his father's. With a surge of nausea, she remembered the gossip she'd overheard just days before at the Mercantile. Whispers of a titled Englishman, a duke no less, asking questions along the waterfront, searching for an American woman, rumors of a child. She had dismissed it as fancy, the kind of romantic story the bored society ladies of Savannah clung to. Now, the proof was in her hands, cold and heavy. She broke the seal, the sound like a bone snapping. The script within was not his. It was a secretary's hand, efficient and impersonal. Asterisk. To the residents of Savannah. Asterisk. Asterisk. Be it known that His Grace, Lucien Blackwell, the 7th Duke of Ravencourt, is presently in the poste d'Aise, Americas, and seeks information regarding the whereabouts of an American woman, one Miss Ariella Monroe, who resided in England some 4 years past. Any intelligence pertaining to a child accompanying her would be met with significant remuneration. Asterisk. The words blurred. Asterisk. Significant remuneration. Asterisk. He was buying his way to her, to their son, Leo, whose very existence was a secret she had guarded with every fiber of her being. A cold fury, one she had nurtured in the silent, lonely nights, rose in her throat. The memory of his face, cold and closed off as stone, flashed behind her eyes. Asterisk. You must leave Ravencourt. Today. Asterisk. No explanation, no defense, just a dismissal that had shattered her world. Now he sought to shatter it again. She stumbled to the window, the letter crumpling in her fist. Her gaze swept over the small, tidy garden she had cultivated with her own hands, a world away from the manicured estates of England. This was her sanctuary, their sanctuary, and he was coming to tear it down. No, she whispered, the word of vow into the humid air. Never. She would not let his cruelty touch her son. She would not be the heart-soft girl he could command and discard. She had run once, pregnant and terrified. She would run again, but this time she was stronger, sharper, a mother with a lion's heart. Moving with a frantic, focused energy, she pulled a small traveling trunk from the wardrobe. She would take only what they needed. Clothes, her research journals, the small pouch of money she had painstakingly saved. They would go north, to Charleston, perhaps further. Somewhere his title held no sway, where his money couldn't find them. She would pack, she would collect Leo, and by nightfall they would be gone. The Duke of Ravencourt would find only dust and ghosts in Savannah. The air of Savannah was a physical assault, thick, humid and heavy with the scent of salt, river silt and blooming jasmine, a far cry from the crisp, rain-scented air of his English estates. Lucien Blackwell, Duke of Ravencourt, stood on the gangplank of Time's the sea serpent *, his boots meeting the wooden dock with a thud that felt like a punctuation mark to his folly. He was a man out of place. His London-tailored coat was too heavy, the black wool absorbing the southern sun like a blot of ink. He felt the stares of the dock workers, their gazes lingering on the obvious foreignness of his bearing, the cut of his clothes, the grim intensity etched onto his face. For 4 years, the ghost of Ariella Monroe had been a constant, aching presence. But it was a vague spectre, a memory of soft laughter and vibrant eyes, tinged with the bitter shame of his own actions. Now, the ghost had a shape, a location, and it was tethered to a truth so profound it had driven him across an ocean. The word, first whispered by a former servant, bought off by his increasingly desperate inquiries, had struck him with the force of a physical blow. *, the American Miss, Your Grace, she was with child when she left. *, his child, his heir, the one thing his wretched, gilded world demanded of him, and he had, in his blind pride and manipulated fear, cast them both away. The carriage is ready, Your Grace, his valet, Higgins, said quietly, his own English complexion already glistening with perspiration. Lucien gave a curt nod, his eyes scanning the bustling port city. It was chaotic, vibrant, and utterly alien. How did one find a single woman in such a place? He had started with the methods he knew: money and influence, letters to prominent households, inquiries with shipping captains, offers of reward. It was a sledgehammer approach, and now, standing here, he felt a sudden, chilling premonition that it had been a mistake. Ariella was clever. If she had wanted to be found, he would have known long ago. The fact that she had vanished so completely meant she did not wish to be found. By him. He climbed into the carriage, the plush interior offering no comfort. He was wholly unprepared for this climate, for this crude, democratic society, for the possibility that she might look at him with pure hatred. He deserved hatred. He welcomed it. It was the indifference he feared. He had pictured their reunion 1,000 times. He would explain, he would beg, he would lay his title and his wealth at her feet. But as the carriage rattled through the streets of Savannah, past grand houses with wide verandas and lush, untamed gardens, a new fear took root. What if explanation was not enough? What if the woman he was searching for was no longer the girl he remembered? The Ariella he knew was spirited, but trusting. The Ariella who had survived his betrayal and raised his child alone in a new world. Who had she become? He leaned his head back against the leather seat, closing his eyes. The coastal wind whispered through the carriage window, and he found himself whispering her name into it, a prayer to a god he had long since stopped believing in. Ariella. He was coming, and he was terrified of what he would find. The first flurries of an unseasonable southern snow began to fall as Ariella rushed from the bank, the funds from her closed account, a searing weight in her reticule. The world had turned to muted grey and white, a strange, silent echo of English winters she had tried to forget. Her plan was in motion. She would collect Leo and be on the afternoon coach to Charleston. Freedom was a tangible thing, just hours away. It was this desperate hope that made the sight before her so catastrophic. There, standing on the porch of Mrs. Higgins' cottage school, was a tall, broad-shouldered figure in a black coat, his back to her. The way he stood, the set of his shoulders, it was a silhouette etched into her soul. Her feet rooted to the cobblestones, the world narrowing to a single, impossible point. No, it can't be. As if sensing her horror, he turned. Time folded in on itself. 4 years vanished in a heartbeat. Lucien Blackwell. He was older, the lines around his eyes and mouth deeper, his expression graver. But the stark, aristocratic beauty of him was undimmed, sharpened by a new, raw intensity. His dark eyes, the very ones she saw every day in her son's face, found hers across the snowy lane. The air left her lungs in a rush. He moved toward her, his strides long and purposeful, eating up the distance she had fought so hard to create. The snowflakes caught in his dark hair, a cruel, romantic parody of a moment that should have been tender. Ariella, Her name on his lips was not the prayer from the wind, it was a statement, a claim. It was the voice from her nightmares, wrapped in a velvet regret that did nothing to soften its edge. Betrayal, hot and acidic, erupted from where she had buried it. "You," she breathed, the word a shard of ice. She took a step back, holding up a hand as if to ward off a ghost. "Stay away from me. I cannot." His voice was low, rough with an emotion she refused to name. "Ariella, we must talk." "Talk?" A bitter, broken laugh escaped her. "You ended any possibility of talk 4 years ago with a single sentence. Have you come to deliver another? You must leave Savannah. Today?" He flinched, a flicker of genuine pain in his eyes, but it only fueled her fury. It was a mistake. A catastrophic, cowardly mistake. A times mistake asterisk? She took a step forward now, her fear morphing into a righteous, protective rage. "You destroyed my life there. You cast me out like I was nothing. And now you follow me here? To what end? To finish the job? I learned. I heard." He struggled for the words, his composure cracking, revealing the desperate man beneath the duke. "Is it true? Ariella, look at me. Did you carry my child?" The question hung between them, the most dangerous secret laid bare. Before she could form a denial, a lie, a shield, the cottage door swung open. Mrs. Higgins emerged, her face worried. "Oh, Mrs. Monroe, there you are. This gentleman was asking after Leo, and I didn't know what to say, he was so insistent." And there, clutching Mrs. Higgins' skirts, was Leo, her beautiful, curious boy. His cheeks were flushed from the warmth inside, his dark, wavy hair tousled. He looked from his mother to the strange, tall man, his head tilted. It was the tilt that did it. It was Lucien's exact mannerism. Lucien's gaze snapped from Ariella to the boy. His breath audibly caught. The world stopped. The snow, the wind, the distant sounds of the city, all of it faded into a profound silence. He stared at his son, at the living, breathing proof of his folly and her secret. The boy's eyes, wide and inquisitive, were his own. There was no denying it, not a shadow of a doubt. The color drained from Lucien's face. All his power, his title, his wealth, meant nothing in that moment. He was looking at his heir. He was looking at the consequence of his greatest sin. He looked back at Ariella, his expression one of utter devastation and awe. "My God," he whispered. Ariella's heart shattered all over again. The battle was lost. He knew. The walk back to her small cottage was a silent, frigid procession. Ariella held Leo's hand in a death grip, her body a tense shield between him and the man who followed a few paces behind. She could feel Lucien's gaze on them, a physical pressure, and every instinct screamed at her to run, to hide, to fight. Once inside, she swiftly guided a confused Leo into his small bedroom. "Play with your blocks, my love. Mama needs to speak with this man." She closed the door, leaning against it for a moment, gathering the shattered pieces of her courage. When she turned, Lucien was standing in the center of her humble parlor. He looked like a king in a peasant's hut, his presence overwhelming the simple, homely space. His eyes were still wide with the shock of discovery, tracing the room, her botanical sketches on the wall, Leo's wooden toys by the hearth, the evidence of the life she had built without him. "You will leave," she said, her voice trembling despite her effort to steady it. "You have seen what you came to see. Now, go back to England." "Ariella," he began, his voice raw. "He is my son. He is times my times son," she fired back, the words a desperate, fierce claim. "You forfeited any right to him the moment you chose your reputation over me, over us. Do you have any idea what I endured? The voyage home, alone and shamed, facing my family, building this life from nothing? You do not get to walk in here after 4 years and say, 'He is my son.'" He took a step toward her, his hands clenching at his sides. "I did not know. I swear to you, on my life, I did not know." "And if you had," she challenged, her eyes blazing, "would it have changed anything? Or would your advisors have found a way to make my child disappear, just as they made me disappear?" The accusation hit its mark. He looked as if she had struck him. "No, never." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of utter desperation she had never seen in him before. The impeccable Duke of Side, Ravencourt was unraveling before her eyes. "Ariella, please, I am begging you. Let me see him. Let me speak to him. Just for an hour. No, 1 hour, he pleaded, his voice dropping, stripping away the last of his ducal authority. He was just a man, broken and begging. Under your supervision, any rules you set, I will abide by. I need to look at him. I need to hear his voice. His raw need was a potent weapon, chipping away at the fortress of her anger. She saw the awe in his eyes when he had looked at Leo, an emotion too pure and profound to be feigned. It wasn't about the title, not in that moment. It was about the child. She was trapped. If she refused utterly, what would he do? Use his power, his money, to take him? Her threat to run was now empty. He had found them. This, a controlled, supervised meeting, was the only bargaining chip she had left. Her heart felt like it was being torn in two. The part of her that still remembered loving this man warred with the part that had built walls to survive. 1 hour, she finally said, the words tasting like ash. You may stay for 1 hour. You will not tell him who you are. You will not touch him without my permission. The moment that hour is done, you will leave. Do you understand? Relief washed over his features, so profound it was almost painful to witness. Yes, I understand. Thank you. She gave a sharp, jerky nod. Her arms crossed tightly over her chest, a warden granting a prisoner a fleeting glimpse of the sun. Your hour begins now. Ariella moved to the door of Leo's room, her hand pausing on the knob. She felt like she was opening the gates to a siege, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. She took a steadying breath, forcing a calm she did not feel onto her face before pushing the door open. Leo, darling, we have a visitor. Leo looked up from his fortress of wooden blocks, his dark eyes times his time's eyes, curious and utterly without fear. The tall man from outside? Yes, Ariella said, her voice tight. She stepped aside, and Lucien filled the doorway, seeming to make the small room even smaller. He had removed his heavy coat and stood in his waistcoat and shirt sleeves, a small, almost unconscious attempt to appear less imposing. He looked utterly out of place, a statue of granite and grief amidst the cheerful chaos of a child's domain. Hello, Lucien said, his voice unusually soft. The deep baritone sanded down to a rough whisper. Hello, Leo replied, tilting his head again in that achingly familiar way. Why is your coat so long? Ariella held her breath, waiting for the ducal stiffness, the awkwardness of a man who had never conversed with a 4-year-old. But Lucien simply knelt, bringing himself to Leo's level. The gesture was so unexpected, so devoid of pride, that Ariella felt a crack form in the ice around her heart. It's the fashion where I come from, he explained gravely. It's very cold there. It's snowing here, Leo announced, pointing to the window. But Mama says it won't stay. Your mother is very wise. Lucien's gaze flickered to Ariella for a fraction of a second, full of a painful sincerity, before returning to Leo. What are you building? A castle, Leo said, his focus returning to his blocks. For the Moss Knights. They protect the kingdom from he struggled for the word. The invading force? Lucien suggested quietly, moving a little closer on his knees. Yes, Leo's face lit up. The invading force of beetles. He picked up a small, dried piece of Spanish moss. This is Sir Moss-a-Lot. He's the bravest. Ariella watched, speechless, as the Duke of Ravencourt, a man who commanded Parliament and vast estates, listened with rapt attention as her son explained the intricate politics of his Moss Knight kingdom. Lucien didn't condescend. He asked questions. He suggested a better placement for a block to strengthen the castle wall. He accepted a piece of moss and was appointed Sir Blackcoat, the newest knight in the order. He was natural. The stiffness, she remembered, the formality that had often been a wall between them in England, was gone. In its place was a raw, wondering tenderness. He watched Leo's every move, his expression one of such devastating awe that it was difficult to look at directly. It was the look of a man finding an oasis after years in a desert. Your son is remarkable, Ariella, he said softly, his eyes still on the boy. I know, she said, her voice barely audible. The hours slipped away, measured by the steady tick of the mantel clock in the parlor. Leo, emboldened by his new friend, brought out his prized possession, a well-loved picture book of North American flora. He climbed into Lucien's lap as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Ariella's breath caught. Lucien froze for a moment, his entire body going still, as if the small weight of the child was the most profound burden he had ever borne. Then, slowly, carefully, his arms came up to encircle Leo. One hand splayed across his small back, holding him secure. He rested his chin on top of Leo's head and closed his eyes, a single, unguarded moment of pure, agonizing emotion crossing his face. This was not the cold, calculating aristocrat who had banished her. This was a man being unmade and remade, all in the span of an hour. "Read," Leo commanded, tapping the book. And Lucien, his voice thick with a feeling too large for words, began to read. He stumbled over the common American plant names, his English accent wrapping around pokeweed and tupelo in a way that made Leo giggle. Ariella stood by the door, her arms falling limp to her sides. The anger was still there, a hot coal in her chest. The betrayal was a scar that would never fully fade. But as she watched the man she had once loved cradle their son, reading to him with a reverence usually reserved for holy texts, she saw the first, undeniable cracks in the monster she had built him up to be. She saw, for the first time, the man he might have been, the man he perhaps was, buried under the weight of a title and the manipulations of viperous advisors. The clock in the parlor chimed the hour. The spell was broken. Lucien's voice trailed off. Leo looked up, disappointed. "You have to go now," Ariella said, her own voice unsteady. Lucien nodded, his movement slow with a reluctance that felt genuine. He carefully extricated himself from Leo, setting him gently on the floor. "Goodbye, Sir Leo," he said, his tone formal but his eyes soft. "It was an honor to serve in your castle." "Bye, Sir Blackcoat," Leo said, already turning back to his blocks. Lucien rose to his full height, his gaze meeting Ariella's across the room. The raw, unguarded need in his eyes was gone, replaced by a deep, resolute sorrow. He had been given a taste of heaven, only to be cast out again. Without a word, he walked past her and out of the cottage. The door clicked shut behind him. But the silence he left behind was no longer the peaceful silence of before. It was charged, fractured, and Ariella knew, with a sinking certainty, that nothing would ever be the same again. The snow had turned to a cold, grey rain, tapping a mournful rhythm against the window panes. For 2 days, Ariella had moved through her life in a state of heightened alert, every sound of a passing carriage making her jump. Lucien had not returned. The silence should have been a relief, but it felt like the calm before a storm. On the 3rd morning, the storm arrived, though not in the form she expected. A different Englishman appeared at her gate. This one was older, his face a road map of severity, dressed in clothes that were expensive but lacked Lucien's innate elegance. He carried a leather-bound portfolio and an air of unshakable authority. He was not here to beg, he was here to transact. Ariella watched from the window, her blood running cold, as the man exchanged a few terse words with a neighbor before being directed to her cottage. She knew, with a primal certainty, that this was the uncle. The threat Lucien had only hinted at was now standing on her doorstep. Before the man could knock, another figure intercepted him. Lucien. He must have been watching the house. He emerged from the misting rain like a phantom, his expression thunderous. The 2 men faced each other on her narrow garden path, their postures rigid, their low, furious voices carrying through the damp air, though not the words. Ariella's heart hammered against her ribs. She saw Lucien gesture sharply toward the street. The older man smiled, a thin, unpleasant curve of the lips, and said something that made Lucien's fists clench at his sides. After a tense, silent battle of wills, the older man tipped his hat in a mocking gesture and retreated, but the look he cast toward her cottage was one of pure, predatory calculation. A moment later, a firm knock sounded at her door. It was Lucien. She opened it, her body blocking the entrance. "We need to talk," he said, his voice gravelly with strain. "Now, please." She hesitated, then stepped back, allowing him in. He was soaked, rainwater dripping from his dark hair onto the floorboards. He looked more like the ruthless duke from her memories than the vulnerable man from Leo's room. "Who was that?" she demanded, though she already knew. "My uncle," he bit out, confirming her fear. "Alistair Blackwell. What does he want?" "What he has always wanted, the dukedom of Ravencourt." Lucien paced the small space, a caged predator. "He has spent the last 4 years undermining my authority, whispering in the ears of my peers, and building a case that I am an unfit heir, unstable, reckless, unable to produce a legitimate son to secure the line." He stopped and turned to her, his eyes bleak. When rumors reached him that I was searching for you and that there might be a child, he didn't see a family. He saw a threat. And an opportunity. An opportunity. Ariella wrapped her arms around herself, a chill seeping into her bones that had nothing to do with the rain. If he can prove the child is not mine, he can use the scandal to finally push me out. But if he confirms the child is times mine. Lucien's jaw tightened. His solicitors in England are already preparing a petition. He will argue that an illegitimate child raised by an unknown American commoner in squalor is unfit to be the Ravencourt heir. He will petition the crown to have the line of succession bypassed in his favor. The world tilted. Squalor, she whispered, a hot flush of shame and anger washing over her. This cottage, her hard-won peace, her life, it was all she had, and he called it times squalor asterisk? His words, not mine, Lucien said fiercely, seeing the hurt in her eyes. But that is how he will present it to the House of Lords. He will paint a picture of neglect and obscurity, and he will win, Ariella. He has the connections and the ruthlessness to do it. He took a step toward her, his intensity pinning her in place. But if he wins, it doesn't end with the title. Acknowledged by me but disinherited by the crown, Leo would be a loose end, a permanent threat to Alistair's claim. My uncle is a man who tidies up loose ends. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place with terrifying clarity. This wasn't just about the past anymore. It wasn't just about her broken heart. Lucien wasn't just here for redemption. He was here because her son times their times son was in active, tangible danger. Her protective instincts, always simmering near the surface, erupted into a full-blown inferno. She had thought the greatest threat was Lucien's presence. She now saw he was merely the harbinger. The real threat was the viper's nest he came from, a nest that had just slithered across the ocean to her doorstep. He can't have him, she said, her voice low and deadly. I will burn his world to the ground before I let him touch my son. For the first time since his return, something like respect flickered in Lucien's gaze, mixed with a shared, ferocious purpose. I know, he said, and for the first time, Ariella, we are on precisely the same side. The fragile, wary truce between them solidified over the next 24 hours, forged in the fire of a common enemy. Lucien took a room at a nearby inn, a visible, looming sentinel. He provided Ariella with the names of Alistair's associates in Savannah, men with legal credentials and cold eyes, who had begun making discreet inquiries about the Monroe woman and her fatherless child. Ariella, in turn, did not bolt. The threat was no longer abstract. It had a name and a face. Running now would make her look guilty, unstable, exactly the picture Alistair wanted to paint, so she stayed, her every sense on high alert, teaching Leo to recognize the strange man with the severe face and to run to her immediately if he saw him. The confrontation came not in a legal office or a dark alley, but in the bright, exposed light of the public park. Ariella had taken Leo for his afternoon outing, a small slice of normalcy in their newly fraught lives. Lucien was there too, maintaining a respectful distance, a newspaper in his hand but his attention fixed on his son chasing a squirrel. For a moment, it was almost peaceful. Then Alistair appeared. He did not approach them directly. Instead, he walked calmly toward Leo, a benign smile plastered on his face. He carried a small, expensive-looking wooden toy soldier. "Hello there, young man," Alistair said, his voice oily smooth. Ariella moved instantly, a mother hawk swooping in. She reached Leo just as Lucien did, both of them placing themselves between the child and the threat. "Step away from my son, Alistair," Lucien commanded, his voice low and dangerous. "Your son?" Alistair's smile widened, a predator baring its teeth. "Is he Lucien, by law, by any public acknowledgement? Or is he simply a bastard you're trying to legitimize to save your own skin?" He held up the toy. "I merely wish to give the boy a gift. It is a pity his circumstances are so uncertain." The insinuation, delivered in such a genteel tone, was more venomous than a shout. Leo, sensing the tension, clutched Ariella's skirts, his small face worried. "His circumstances are none of your concern," Ariella shot back, her voice trembling with rage. "You will leave us alone." "Or what, my dear?" Alistair's eyes, cold and calculating, swept over her simple dress. "You have no power here. No name, no fortune, no influence. You are an obstacle, and I am very good at removing obstacles." It was the wrong thing to say. It stripped away the pretense and laid bare his intentions. Lucien took a step forward, his proximity forcing his uncle to look up at him. "You will not speak to her that way. You will not come near my child again. If you do, I will forget you are my blood." Alistair scoffed. "Your blood is the only thing protecting you from ruin, boy. But my patience is at an end." He turned his gaze back to Ariella. "I have filed a petition with the local magistrate, a claim of moral unfitness, questioning the environment in which the child is being raised. It will be heard in 2 days' time." Ariella felt the ground fall away from her. He was moving faster than she had imagined possible, using the American legal system as his weapon. "On what grounds?" Lucien snarled. "On the grounds that the mother is an unwed woman of questionable reputation, who consorts with a known libertine English nobleman," Alistair said coolly. "It paints a rather sordid picture, don't you think? Not the kind of home fit for a future peer of the realm, should such a far-fetched claim ever be recognized." The clever, cruel twist of the knife was masterful. He was using Lucien's presence times against times them. Leo began to cry, soft, confused whimpers against Ariella's leg. The sound shattered her last vestige of calm. She looked from Alistair's smug face to Lucien's enraged one, and then down at her terrified son. The breaking point had been reached. She looked directly at Lucien, her eyes blazing with a united, ferocious purpose. "Enough," she said, her voice clear and sharp, cutting through the tension. "This end, now, together." Lucien gave a single, grim nod. The battle lines were drawn not between them, but around them. To protect their child, they would have to stand as one. The cottage felt like a war council chamber. Leo was safely asleep, the traumatic event in the park having exhausted him into slumber. The quiet of the house was a stark contrast to the storm raging between its two occupants. Ariella stood by the cold fireplace, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. Lucien paced, the events of the afternoon having stripped him of all ducal composure. The spectre of Alistair's legal petition hung in the air, a ticking clock. "He is using my presence against you," Lucien finally said, the words ripped from him. "My being here, the very thing I thought would protect you, is his primary weapon. He is a viper." "He is," Ariella agreed, her voice quiet but steady. "But he did not create the weakness he exploits. You did." She turned to face him, the firelight catching the unshed tears in her eyes. "I have stood with you against him today, Lucien. I will do what I must to protect our son. But I cannot fight a ghost. I need to know. Why? Why did you send me away?" This was the question that had haunted her for 4 years, the question that stood between them, thicker than any wall. Lucien stopped his pacing. He looked at her, and for the first time he made no attempt to hide the shame and the agony that lived in the depths of his eyes. The masks were off, the Duke was gone, only the man remained, broken and exposed. "They came to me the morning after the ball," he began, his voice hollow, as if recounting a story that happened to someone else. "Lord Cheswick and Mr. Albright. They had evidence, a forged letter, supposedly from you to a lover back in America. They had a footman paid to swear he'd seen you in a compromising situation. It was all a lie, a tapestry of lies woven so expertly I could not see the threads." He dragged a hand down his face. "They told me you were a schemer, an adventuress, that your sole aim was to trap me into marriage, to taint the Ravencourt line. They said if I did not sever ties with you immediately and publicly, the scandal would not just destroy my reputation, but cripple the political alliances my family had built for a century, that I would be responsible for the ruin of everyone who depended on the dukedom." He looked at her, his gaze begging her to understand. "I was young in my title, Ariella. I was drowning in the responsibility of it, and I was a coward. I was so terrified of being the Blackwell who failed, who lost everything, that I chose to lose you instead." The confession hung in the air, the truth at last, ugly and raw. "You believed them," she whispered, the pain as fresh as it had been that day. "You believed I could do that." "I was a fool." The words were a raw cry. "I knew you. I knew your heart, and I let them poison me against the one pure thing I had ever known. I told myself that sending you away cleanly, with funds, was the kindest thing to do. A cleaner break. I thought I was being strong." He gave a bitter, self-loathing laugh. "I was the weakest I have ever been." He took a step toward her, his hands open at his sides, offering her nothing but his shattered truth. "There has not been a single day in the last 4 years that I have not regretted it. Not one. The moment you were gone, I knew. The silence you left behind was a scream. I began my own inquiries, too late. I discovered the forgeries, the bribes. I discovered my uncle was the architect of it all, fearing an American duchess would dilute his influence over me. By then, you had vanished, and I was left with the hollow victory of a preserved title and a ruined soul. Ariella listened, the old wound being torn open. But this time, the poison was draining out. It wasn't a cold, calculated rejection. It was the failure of a young, overwhelmed man, manipulated by the wolves in his circle. It was a tragedy, not a malice. When I heard about the child, he continued, his voice dropping to a whisper, it was both my salvation and my damnation, a chance to right the greatest wrong of my life, and the living proof of the family I had thrown away. He stood before her, completely defenseless. I do not ask for your forgiveness, Ariella. I do not deserve it. I only ask for the chance to protect you and Leo now, to be the man I should have been then. Let me stand against him. Let me fix this. Ariella looked at him, truly looked at him. She saw the ghost of the proud man she had loved, brought to his knees by regret. She saw the father who had looked upon his son with awe. She saw a partner in the fight to come. The anger did not vanish, but it shifted, making room for something else, a fragile, terrifying understanding. Trust would not be rebuilt with words or apologies, it would be built with action. She took a deep, shuddering breath. Then we fight, she said, and you will have the chance to prove who you truly are. Of course, here is the final chapter. The magistrate's chamber was packed with Savannah's curious elite, drawn by the scandal of a duke in their midst. Lucien Blackwell stood before the bench, the picture of aristocratic concern, his solicitor laying out the meticulously crafted argument for Ariella's moral unfitness. He spoke of her unwed status, her clandestine meetings with the duke, painting a portrait of instability and impropriety that was designed to shock a conservative society. Ariella sat, back straight, her hand clasped tightly in Lucien's. It was the first time she had willingly taken his hand since his return, a united front visible to all. When it was their turn, Lucien did not let his solicitor speak. He rose himself, his voice cutting through the stuffy room with a quiet, undeniable authority. Everything my uncle has said is a lie built upon a greater lie, he began, his gaze sweeping over the room before settling on the magistrate. 4 years ago, I fell in love with Ariella Monroe. She was the truest, most honorable person I had ever known. And I, a coward manipulated by those who sought to control my title, betrayed that love. I sent her away to protect a legacy I was too weak to defend on my own. A ripple of shock went through the crowd. A duke was not supposed to confess his failings in public. She left England carrying my child, my heir. She faced that alone, building a life of dignity and strength here, far from the vipers of my court. He turned to look at Ariella, his love and pride for her plain for all to see. The only unfit environment for my son is the one my uncle would create, a world of manipulation, greed, and cruelty, the world I was too blind to escape. Alistair stood, sputtering. Your Grace, this is highly irregular. You are destroying the dignity of your title. Lucien turned on him, his voice dropping to a deadly calm. The dignity of my title? He then did the unthinkable. He reached into his coat and placed the Ravencourt signet ring, the symbol of his power, on the magistrate's desk. A collective gasp filled the room. I renounce it, Lucien said, his voice clear and strong. I abdicate the dukedom of Ravencourt. Here and now, let my uncle have the hollow shell of it. He cannot have my son. He cannot have the woman I love. My family is my title now, and I will spend the rest of my life proving myself worthy of it. The silence in the room was absolute. Alistair stared, his face a mask of stunned, furious victory. He had won the title, but he had lost everything else. Lucien turned back to the magistrate. The petition is moot. The child is no longer an heir to a dukedom. He is simply a boy, loved by his mother, and by me. The case collapsed on the spot. Outside, in the blinding Savannah sun, Lucien and Ariella stood alone on the courthouse steps. The crowd had dispersed, buzzing with the unbelievable news. You gave up everything, Ariella whispered, looking up at him, her heart aching with a profound, overwhelming tenderness. I gave up nothing, he said, cupping her face, his thumb stroking her cheek. I chose everything. I choose you. I choose Leo. I choose this life, with you, on your terms, whatever they may be. Tears finally spilled down Ariella's cheeks, but they were not tears of sorrow. They were tears of release, of a weight she had carried for years finally lifting. He had not just said he was sorry, he had proven it. With the most powerful action he could possibly take, he had chosen them. She saw the man before her, not the Duke of Ravencourt, but Lucien Blackwell, a man stripped of his armor, flawed and brave, and finally, completely hers. She leaned into his touch, her own hand coming up to cover his. The past was buried, the future was uncertain, but it was theirs to shape. Our terms, she corrected softly, a true, genuine smile finally reaching her eyes. We choose our future, together. He leaned his forehead against hers, a breath of relief, of hope, passing between them. The battle was over. The healing could begin. In the quiet of that moment, surrounded by the ghosts of the past and the promise of tomorrow, they chose each other, not out of duty or force, but out of love, hard-won and freely given. And it was more than enough.